My unemployed husband stole $50K to go to Paris with his mistress, but he used my fraud detection trap card and came back bragging about the trip while federal agents knocked on our door. I'm 34 years old. I work in cybersecurity, and what my husband did a few months ago was so stupid, so incredibly predictable, that to this day I can't believe he thought it would work out. I guess I should start at the beginning. I mean, with how I met Garrett and why I didn't see the signs that are now so obvious, they're basically screaming in my face every time I think about it. I met Garrett about 6 years ago at a bar. You know, one of those places where you go with friends after work and end up staying longer than you planned. He was charming, like really charming, with that smile that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. He worked in sales at the time, or so he said, and he had all these stories about difficult clients and business trips. We started dating and everything seemed perfect. You know? He was attentive, funny, always knew what to say. We got married 2 years later, and honestly, I thought I'd found someone special. Someone I could build something real with. What I didn't notice, or rather what I ignored because I was in love or whatever, was that Garrett had this way of, let's say, avoiding responsibilities. At first it was small things, like forgetting to pay a bill or saying his boss was an idiot and that's why he got fired. Then it became that he couldn't find work because the market was tough, or because companies didn't value his experience, or because he was waiting for the perfect opportunity. And I, like a complete fool, kept paying for everything while he supposedly looked for jobs. By the time we'd been married 4 years, Garrett basically wasn't working. Like, he literally spent his days at home watching series, playing video games, and telling me he was sending out resumes. I made good money at my job, honestly, enough to support both of us without problems, but it was starting to bother me that he wasn't contributing anything. When I'd ask him what he'd done during the day, he always had an excuse. There was always some reason why he hadn't accomplished anything. And I kept working, kept paying for everything, kept being the responsible adult while he lived like he was 20 and his parents were paying for everything. The ironic thing, and I swear this is the funniest part of this whole story, is that my job is literally detecting fraud. I spend 8 hours a day analyzing suspicious behavior patterns in digital transactions, creating systems to catch people trying to steal financial information, and training security teams on how to identify threats. I'm good at what I do, like really good. I've worked on cases where we've caught criminals who stole millions. I've testified in federal courts. I've given conferences on cybersecurity. And my own husband, the person who saw me work on this every day, thought he could steal from me. It was in March, I think. Or maybe early April. I don't remember exactly the date, but I do remember the moment. It was like 2 a.m, and I'd gotten up to get water. I had insomnia because we were in the middle of a big project at work and my brain wouldn't shut off. When I walked past the living room, I saw the light from my laptop on. Garrett was there, sitting on the couch with my computer on his lap. And when he saw me, he startled so badly he almost dropped the laptop on the floor. He told me he couldn't sleep and was watching YouTube videos, that his laptop was dead and mine was closer. I told him no problem and went back to bed. But something about the whole situation felt weird, you know? The way he got nervous, how quickly he closed the laptop. I didn't think much about it until 2 weeks later. I was checking my banking app during lunch, something I do basically every day because, well, it's part of being paranoid about financial security, and I saw something that made me spit out my coffee. There were charges for $50,000. $50,000 on one of my credit cards. Flights to Paris, luxury hotels, expensive restaurants, designer clothing stores, all billed over the past 2 weeks. And Garrett, my dear husband, had supposedly been at home the whole time because I saw him every night when I got home from work, except I hadn't seen him every night. Now that I thought about it, he'd been going out a lot, saying he was going to the gym, or to see friends, or to job interviews. And I, busy with my project, hadn't paid attention. I felt like a complete idiot. My hands were shaking as I reviewed each charge, each transaction, trying to understand what was happening. But then I realized something that made everything change. The card he'd used wasn't my real card. It was a dummy card. A fake account I use for fraud detection training at work. Basically, at my company we create these fake accounts connected to monitoring systems to teach teams what fraud patterns look like in real time. They have real numbers, they work like normal cards, but they're linked to tracking programs that record Absolutely everything. Every transaction, every location, every detail. And Garrett, the genius, had stolen the information from that specific card. I couldn't believe it. I literally couldn't process what I was seeing. My husband had stolen from me, and he'd done it in the stupidest way possible, with a card that was specifically designed to catch thieves. I felt like my chest was going to explode, but also, and I know this sounds weird, I felt a kind of cold satisfaction because I knew exactly what was going to happen next. This wasn't just theft, it was a federal crime. Dummy accounts are protected by the same laws as real accounts, and stealing that information meant that Garrett had committed identity fraud, credit card theft, and possibly other crimes I couldn't even enumerate at that moment. The first thing I did was call my friend Lauren, who's a lawyer. Well, technically not my lawyer at that time, but she became one very quickly. I explained everything to her while pacing in circles in my office, and she told me to stay calm, not to confront Garrett yet, and to gather as much evidence as possible. She gave me Chloe's contact, a lawyer who specializes in divorces and financial fraud cases, and told her to call me as soon as possible. Then I went back to my desk and started documenting everything. Screenshots of every transaction, GPS location, records of the purchases, information from the hotels where he'd stayed. Everything was there, perfectly recorded by the company's monitoring systems. 2 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Agent Keller, a federal investigator assigned to financial fraud cases. He told me they'd detected fraudulent activity on one of the accounts linked to my company and needed to talk to me. I told him I knew exactly what was happening and who was responsible. There was a long silence on the other end, and then he asked if we could meet. I said yes, and we arranged to meet the next day at a coffee shop near my office. The meeting with Agent Keller was surreal. He was a man about 45 years old, with that federal agent look you see in movies, like dark suit and serious expression. I explained the whole situation to him, showed him the evidence I'd compiled, and told him my husband had stolen the information from my laptop. He took notes on everything, asked me a million questions about my relationship with Garrett, about when he could have accessed my computer, about whether I had any idea he was planning this. I told him about that night I found him with my laptop, and he nodded like that confirmed something he already suspected. Meanwhile, Garrett kept acting like nothing was wrong. He'd come home, ask me how my day had been, we'd watch Netflix together. It was so normal that it almost made me doubt whether what had happened really happened. But I knew it was just a matter of time before everything exploded. And honestly, part of me wanted to see how he was going to react when he realized he'd been caught. I didn't have to wait long. A week after my meeting with Agent Keller, Garrett came home with 2 big suitcases and that stupid smile he'd put on when he was proud of something. He told me he'd won an online contest, that the prize was a trip to Europe, and that he'd just gotten back from Paris. He showed me photos on his phone, photos of him at the Eiffel Tower, at elegant restaurants, at hotels that probably cost $1,000 a night. He told me about the wines he'd tried, about the clothes he'd bought at designer boutiques, about how incredible it had all been. I just looked at him, feeling the rage rising up my throat, but I kept my cool. I asked him more details about the supposed contest, and he made up an elaborate story about winning on some sweepstakes website. It made no sense. Like literally no sense. But he kept talking like I was too dumb to notice. So I decided to do something Chloe had suggested. I took out my phone, opened the recording app, and asked him how he'd paid for the extras of the trip, because contests normally don't cover everything. And that's where Garrett completely hung himself. He told me, with that arrogant smile, that he'd used one of my cards because I was so busy with work that I wouldn't even notice. He said he deserved a vacation after looking for work for so long, that I made enough money, and that he'd just taken what he needed. He said it like that, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, as if stealing $50,000 from your wife was something reasonable. I kept recording, asking specific questions about what he'd bought, how much he'd spent, how he'd obtained the card information, and he answered everything, proud, without any shame. When he finished talking, I told him I had to go out for a moment. He asked me where I was going, and I told him to the store, something completely mundane. I left the apartment, walked to the corner, and called Agent Keller. I told him that Garrett had just confessed everything in a recording and asked him when they could come. He told me in an hour that they already had a warrant and were just waiting for my confirmation. I said perfect, and went back to the apartment. Garrett was unpacking his suitcases, showing me more things he'd bought. Expensive clothes, perfumes, souvenirs. I sat on the couch and let him talk, checking the clock every few minutes. At 6 o'clock exactly, someone knocked on the door. Garrett went to open it, still smiling, probably thinking it was a package or something. When he opened it, there were 2 police officers and Agent Keller standing there. The expression on his face was something I'll never forget. He went from confusion to panic in less than a second. Agent Keller said his full name and informed him he was being arrested for credit card fraud and identity theft. Garrett looked at me, and I just held up my phone and told him everything was recorded, that they had everything they needed. He tried to say something like that I'd authorized him to use the card, that this was a misunderstanding, but the officers told him he could talk to his lawyer. They put handcuffs on him, read him his rights, and took him away. When they closed the door, I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by open suitcases full of designer clothes bought with my stolen money, and I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I ended up doing both. Like I cried for about 10 minutes and then laughed for another 10 because everything was so absurd, so completely ridiculous. My husband had stolen from me using a card designed to catch thieves, had come back bragging about his crime, and was now in federal custody. You couldn't make something like that up even if you tried. The following days were chaos, with legal calls, statements, and meetings with Chloe to start the divorce process. Garrett tried to blame me, like he told his lawyer that I'd induced him to steal the card, that it was a trap I'd set for him because I wanted to leave him. His lawyer must have told him it was the stupidest defense in the world because he quickly changed his story and started asking for a deal. Agent Keller kept me informed of the whole process and explained that Garrett would probably accept a plea deal to avoid going to trial. And that's exactly what happened. 3 months after the arrest, Garrett agreed to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. He had to pay full restitution of the $50,000, plus interest and legal fees, and do community service. He also got a federal criminal record, which basically means his career in anything requiring financial trust is dead. The divorce was finalized shortly after, and honestly, it was the easiest legal process of my life because Garrett didn't have any leverage to fight anything. Oh, and there's a detail I almost forgot to mention. Turns out Garrett wasn't alone in Paris. According to Agent Keller's investigation, he'd been seeing a woman named Nicole for about 6 months. She went with him on the trip, and when she found out Garrett was being prosecuted for fraud, she blocked him everywhere and completely disappeared from his life. Garrett was left alone, without money, without a wife, without a lover, and with a criminal record. Instant karma, I guess. Now I live alone in the same apartment, but it feels completely different without Garrett there. I hired someone to come and change all the furniture we shared, painted the walls colors he hated, and basically erased him from my space. Lauren comes over often, same with other friends from work. And honestly, I feel lighter without him. I didn't realize how much weight I was carrying until he was gone. Like, I literally feel like I can breathe better. Last week, my boss asked me if I wanted to give a talk about the case at a cybersecurity convention. I told her I'd think about it. But honestly, I don't know if I want to tell this story in front of hundreds of industry professionals. Like, it's a perfect lesson about why security measures matter even at home, but it's also incredibly personal and embarrassing to admit that your own husband stole from you. Maybe I'll do it. Maybe not. For now, I'm happy just focusing on my work and rebuilding my life without the dead weight of someone who basically used me for years. What bothers me most, and this is something that still keeps me up at night sometimes, is that I gave him so many opportunities. I paid for everything, supported him, believed his excuses, and he repaid me by stealing from me and cheating on me. But also, and I know this sounds contradictory, I feel a kind of satisfaction knowing that I used exactly the skills he underestimated to catch him. Garrett thought he was smarter than me, thought he could steal from me without consequences, and ended up destroying his own life through pure arrogance and stupidity. Sometimes I wonder if I should have seen the signs earlier, if I should have ended the relationship years ago when it became clear he wasn't going to change. But the truth is, you can't force someone to be a better person. You can't force someone to have ethics or responsibility. The only thing you can do is protect yourself and walk away when you realize they're dragging you down. And that's exactly what I did. Even though it took me longer than I'd like to admit, the irony of all this, the real irony that makes me laugh every time I think about it, is that Garrett could have simply asked for the money. If he'd come and told me, "Hey, I need help with something," I want to take a break. I probably would have given him money for a small trip or something. Not $50,000, obviously, but something. Instead, he decided to steal, lie, and destroy whatever trust remained in our marriage. And now he's paying for it, literally and figuratively, for the next few years of his life. I'm okay now. I mean, as okay as you can be after discovering your husband is a criminal. I work, see my friends, go running on weekends. Lauren says I should try dating someone again, but honestly, I'm not ready for that yet. I need time to process everything, to understand how I didn't see what was happening, and to make sure that if I ever decide to be with someone else, it's someone who's really worth it. For now, I'm focused on myself, on my career, and on building a life that's completely mine without having to carry someone else's weight. And that's enough for now, I guess.